center, the inmates have embraced the program so completely. They now take it upon themselves to guard the fields. They protect what they plant. They take pride in their labor. That kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident. It happens under visionary leadership. From the VDP fighters turned farmers to inmates cultivating national farmland, these initiatives all point to one man's relentless pursuit of a self-reliant Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré. But it also raises a larger, more painful question. Why can't other African countries do the same? Africa is blessed with vast, fertile lands, rich soils, rainfall, resources. Yet the continent still struggles to feed itself. According to the 2022 Global Report on Food Crises, over 140 million people across Africa face acute food insecurity. 1 in 5 Africans goes to bed hungry every night. The tragedy is even worse in regions plagued by insurgency. There, farmers flee their fields. Families abandon their homes. Entire communities are uprooted, trading their harvest for survival. But it doesn't have to be this way. Traoré is showing what's possible when a leader dares to dream beyond dependence. When food is no longer a weapon in foreign hands. When agriculture becomes a tool of freedom, not just survival. Burkina Faso is planting more than crops. It's planting a future. And perhaps, just perhaps, the rest of Africa is watching. The crisis has become so severe that most African countries now rely heavily on foreign aid and food imports just to feed their people. And that's the heartbreak, because Africa has everything it needs to feed itself. Rich soil, a favorable climate, and a massive labor force. So why are we still hungry? The answer is painful. Agriculture in Africa has never been given the attention it truly deserves. Across the continent, farming is dominated by subsistence farmers, men and women using basic tools, producing just enough to survive. There is no scale, no structure, no investment in transforming these smallholders into powerful producers. And while governments roll out agricultural programs every year, most are either abandoned midway or hijacked by bureaucracy and corruption. The people who should benefit, the farmers, rarely see any impact. But the truth remains. With the right leadership, proper techniques, and transparent investment, Africa could not only feed itself, but export to the world. And that matters, not just to fill stomachs, but to rewrite the story of Africa. Because for too long, Africa has been portrayed as poor, helpless, and dependent. A continent always waiting for aid, always at the mercy of others. But that narrative can be changed, and it has been changed before. In the 1980s, a young revolutionary named Thomas Sankara saw what most leaders couldn't. He launched aggressive programs to make Burkina Faso food self-sufficient. He pushed land redistribution, encouraged local farming of rice, millet, and maize, and condemned imported food as a new form of imperialism. And he proved the world wrong. By 1987, Burkina Faso had increased its cereal production to 1.6 billion tons. Jean Ziegler, then UN Special Rapporteur for the Right to Food, declared, "Thomas Sankara has conquered hunger. Burkina, in 4 years, has become food self-sufficient." And the most remarkable part? He did it without a single cent from any foreign power. He did it with vision, with grit, with a belief that Africa could stand on its own. Thomas Sankara's dream was bold, but it was also dangerous. And in 1987, that dream was violently cut short. His death sent shockwaves through Burkina Faso, and with him gone, the country slowly drifted back into dependence, on aid, on imports, on the very systems Sankara tried to break. But now, decades later, there is hope again. His name is Ibrahim Traoré. Young, bold, and unshakably patriotic, Traoré has made it clear, from his speeches to his policies, that he draws deep inspiration from the legacy of Sankara. But he isn't just quoting Sankara's words, he's reviving Sankara's vision. At the Russian African Summit, the world finally took notice. Standing before global leaders, Captain Traoré asked the question so many have been afraid to ask. Why is Africa poor when it holds so much wealth? He called on African leaders to stop begging and start producing. He called for food sovereignty, and he promised that Burkina Faso would lead the way. And unlike many, he acted. In February 2024, Traoré's government launched the Emergency Project for Increasing Agricultural Production, backed by 38.4 million euros from the African Development Bank. This initiative wasn't about politics, it was about survival. The plan was ambitious: distribute 9,000 tons of climate-resilient seeds to over 330,000 farmers. Scale up production of maize, rice, sorghum, wheat, cowpea, and more. And the results? Stunning. In just 1 year, rice production rose from 280,000 to 326,000 metric tons. Millet went from 907,000 to over 1.1 million. Tomato harvest jumped from 315,000 to 360,000 metric tons. Every number tells the same story. Burkina Faso is growing. This project works hand in hand with Traoré's agro-pastoral offensive, a massive campaign to revolutionize the country's agriculture and livestock sectors. And now, the VDP fight unconventional, even uncomfortable action. One of his most surprising decisions? He turned 8,000 volunteer defense fighters, known as VDPS, into farmers. At first glance, it sounds bizarre. Soldiers trained for battle, suddenly holding hoes instead of guns? But this wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. Because Traoré understands something most leaders don't. Real freedom isn't just about driving out foreign troops. It's about feeding your people, controlling your land, owning your future. And that's exactly what this decision was about. In this story, we'll reveal the reason behind this bold move and why it might just be the blueprint for the rest of Africa. They say that if a nation can conquer hunger, it can conquer anything. Because when a people are well fed, when children go to bed with full stomachs and communities have food security, the path to progress becomes clear. Industry, innovation, education, all of it starts with something as simple as food. And that's exactly what's holding Africa back. While the world races ahead in science and technology, Africa is still stuck fighting for the basics. Food, power, roads. The foundations of any great nation are still missing in many parts of the continent. But President Traoré understands this. He knows that independence isn't just about flag waving or political speeches. It's about putting food on every table. That's why he's made self-sufficiency his mission, a vision deeply rooted in the legacy of Burkina Faso's legendary revolutionary, Thomas Sankara, the man who once said, "A country that cannot feed itself is a slave." Traoré heard those words, and now he's putting them into action. Since taking power, he has launched a series of bold programs aimed at transforming Burkina Faso from a land of dependence into a land of strength. One of the most powerful? Turning thousands of fighters into farmers. Just days ago, the first batch of these VDP soldiers, 2,000 men and women, completed a 3-month intensive agricultural training program. They weren't just learning how to survive, they were learning how to grow, harvest, and build. This was done under a national effort called the Presidential Program for Agricultural Production and Food Self-Sufficiency. And it's only the beginning. This isn't just another government policy gathering dust in some office. This is Traoré's answer to a national crisis, a direct response to food insecurity, rising unemployment, and decades of dependency on foreign aid. It's not just policy, it's a war cry, a declaration that hunger will no longer rule Burkina Faso. Under this vision, 8,000 VDP fighters aren't just being trained to protect the nation from enemies. They're being prepared to fight another kind of battle, against poverty, against hunger, against helplessness. These men and women, drawn from every region in the country, will be redeployed, not as soldiers with guns, but as agricultural entrepreneurs, builders of farms, guardians of food security. The first 2,000 have already completed their training in Badnogo, but it wasn't just agriculture they were taught. They were trained in something deeper: patriotism, tree planting, blood donation, education, solidarity. These aren't simply farmers, they're nation builders. They're patriots with a mission far greater than themselves. And the most powerful part of this movement? Most of them are young, because for far too long, Africa has called its youth the leaders of tomorrow, while giving them no seat at the table today. Old men cling to power. Youths are left watching from the sidelines, disillusioned, disengaged, and displaced. But Traoré is changing that. He understands something vital. Africa's greatest resource isn't just its gold or oil or diamonds. It's people. Young, determined, and capable people. Human capital, human power. A generation ready to rise, If only someone believes in them. And now, someone finally does. Africa's most valuable resource isn't buried underground. It's walking its streets, young, energetic, full of potential. But sadly, this resource has been ignored for far too long. Instead of being nurtured, it's being exported. Every year, more and more young Africans leave their homelands, heading to the West in search of opportunity. Over there, they become part of the Western workforce, building economies that never raised them, contributing to nations that never invested in them. They give their strength, their talent, even their lives to build someone else's dream. Africa's best minds, its future scientists, engineers, innovators, are leaving in waves, not because they want to, but because their own leaders failed them, failed to see the power they carry, failed to build systems that could keep them home. But as always, President Traoré is different. He knows the truth. Agriculture is the backbone of every strong nation. Before technology, before industry, before global influence, there must be food, there must be security. And who better to lead that mission than the youth? They have the strength, they have the energy, and under the right leadership, they have the vision. That's what makes this initiative so powerful. Traoré isn't just handing out farming tools, he's handing out purpose. He's giving 8,000 young soldiers a new mission, not just to grow food, but to build a nation. These young farmers aren't just working for themselves or chasing profit. They're tilling the soil with pride, with patriotism, with a deep belief that serving your country doesn't always mean carrying a gun. Sometimes it means carrying a shovel, because growing your own food is how freedom begins. At the graduation ceremony for the 2,000 new agricultural patriots, a powerful message echoed across the crowd, one that came directly from President Traoré himself. Delivered by Burkina Faso's Minister of State, Ismaël Sombié, the speech carried a title as firm and unyielding as the mission itself. Self-sufficiency, a path of no return, 3 evils to ban: laziness, incompetence, and betrayal of the homeland. Sombié's voice rang with clarity and resolve as he spoke. Burkina Faso has taken a path of no return. Our revolution has begun, and it begins with food self-sufficiency, where every Burkinabe can eat to their satisfaction. There is no place today for idle, lazy youth. Burkinabe youth, you must rid yourselves of 3 evils: laziness, incompetence, and betrayal of the homeland. It wasn't just a speech, it was a call to action, a declaration of national identity. These weren't just words, they were a mirror reflecting Traoré's vision, a vision that's already in motion. Burkina Faso has stepped into a new era, one defined by self-reliance, dignity, and hard work. And under Traoré's leadership, there is no turning back. The only way this revolution could be reversed is if Traoré were removed and replaced by a government that does not share his vision. A government more concerned with appeasing foreign interests than empowering its own people. That's why the people must remain vigilant. That's why they must continue to support the man who's charting this new course. Because if Traoré stays in power until 2029, one thing is certain: Burkina Faso will no longer be the same, and the change will be beautiful. As the minister read aloud, the message was crystal clear. The Burkinabe revolution has already begun, and it starts with food. For President Traoré, food self-sufficiency isn't just a policy, it's a mission, a vision where no citizen has to beg, no child goes hungry, no community waits for foreign handouts to survive. A Burkina Faso where every man, woman, and child eats with dignity. And in that vision, there is no space for laziness, no room for idleness. Every Burkinabe youth must rise above 3 evils: laziness, incompetence, and betrayal of the homeland. This initiative isn't just about farming, it's not just about feeding people, it's about saving lives. Because when young people are unemployed, when they're idle and desperate, they become vulnerable. They become easy targets for something far more dangerous: terrorism. Across the Sahel, armed groups have mastered a chilling tactic. They prey on the poor, they target the hungry, they lure in the hopeless. Groups like JNIM infiltrate local communities, offering money, weapons, even false promises of purpose. And the victims? Often just boys, teenagers, some not even old enough to understand the gun they're holding. We've seen the heartbreaking images: children turned into killers, young lives stolen by extremists. futures erased before they ever began. But President Traoré refuses to let that cycle continue. By putting tools in their hands instead of weapons, by giving them purpose instead of pain, he's breaking that pattern. He's showing the youth that they have a choice, that they can fight, not with bullets, but with seeds, sweat, and service to their country. This initiative does more than teach farming. It gives the youth something far more powerful: purpose. By keeping young people engaged, active, and connected to the land, it reduces the risk of them being lured into the hands of terrorists. Because when a young man is working the soil, feeding his family, and building his community, he's far less likely to pick up a gun for the wrong reasons. And let's not forget, these aren't just farmers. They're trained VDP fighters. That means they can defend themselves. They can protect their farms, their villages, and their people. They're not just feeding the nation, they're guarding it. It's an incredible fusion of patriotism and practicality. And we must applaud the thousands of young men and women who answered the call, who stood up and said, "We will build Burkina Faso with our hands." But as we said before, this is only one piece of a larger puzzle. President Traoré has launched many initiatives to reach full food security in Burkina Faso, and one of the most unconventional, and perhaps most surprising, was this. He turned prisoners into farmers. Yes, you heard that right. Even behind bars, Traoré saw potential, because to him, every Burkinabe life matters, and if a man can be reformed, he can also be repurposed to build something good. Just a few months ago, something extraordinary happened. The Burkinabe Minister of Justice and Human Rights, Mr. Adasso Rodriga, paid a visit to Bapora prison, a place once known only for confinement and punishment. But what he found there was transformation. Bapora is no longer just a prison, it's a farm, a living, breathing agricultural center, bursting with rows of wheat, maize, and rice, all cultivated by the very inmates it once held in chains. Imagine that. A correctional facility turned into a force for national development. Like us, the minister was moved by what he saw. Fields stretching to the horizon. Inmates with tools in their hands, not weapons. Growth, not destruction. After the tour, he stood before the press and spoke firmly. This is the first time this facility has reached such a level of agricultural production. What you see here is a direct result of the Presidential Initiative for Food Self-Sufficiency and the agricultural offensive led by the Ministry of Agriculture. The vision of the head of state is clear. Burkina Faso must produce what it consumes and never rely on foreign aid again. What a remarkable shift, from prison walls to fields of hope. But that wasn't the end of his message. He spoke of the deeper crisis, the silent emergency sweeping through Burkina Faso, an economy struggling to breathe, a nation where 90% of the population is made up of young people, but far too many of them are unemployed, vulnerable, and desperate. That desperation has a cost, and often it ends in handcuffs. Crime, he said, has become a survival tactic. And the prison population? It's rising fast, fueled by poverty, insecurity, and a lack of opportunity. But under Traoré's leadership, even this problem is being turned into a solution. Because where others see criminals, he sees people who still have something to give, something